As Crystal said, I'm Sara Mechtenberg and this is Drew Kessler. We are with Houston Engineering. I think we're gonna have a little bit of a different flavor. We're more on the outreach rather than the education side of things, but so we tie in a little bit, but not quite exactly on the educational front. So if anybody sat in our presentation yesterday.
I'm on a meeting here. Hang on.
Okay. I'm gonna replicate what I said just a little bit, so bear with me. But again, I am an environmental engineer, but I have Drew Kessler here with me, who is an environmental scientist. I've been working in the state of Nebraska on water resources engineering type projects for a long time. A lot of them have involved water quality from a planning standpoint. But now my company was acquired about 3 years ago by Houston Engineering. When we were acquired, we were exposed to this wealth of knowledge from other states, where Houston Engineering drew out of Minnesota. And there's quite a bit of knowledge that I've been trying to extract from them and bring into Nebraska and see how we can parallel any of these ideas and projects that they've been working on. So with that, I will let Drew start talking about.
Sounds great, thanks, Sarah. And so we're gonna actually start outside of the Great Plains, but we're gonna work our way back to the Great Plains as we work through this presentation. So I'm gonna start with some information on Wisconsin, then we're gonna transition to Iowa and finally land in Nebraska. And then a quick plug at the end for something we've worked on that's a little more nationwide. On this slide, the first thing I want to emphasize, we're going to be talking about farmer-led groups. I know that the content I'm about to go through is not the originator of the idea of farmer-led groups. We've had some great presentations even during sessions here on how farmers are being engaged in the space of water and conservation. But the first part I'm going to highlight is a unique program in Wisconsin. It's run by DATCAP, where it's a mouthful, Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection. I'm not sure where the last A comes from, but it does make the acronym work a little better. So we'll go with that. Their state has actually appropriated since 2016 an annual pool of funding that groups of farmers can come together and apply for to operate farmer-led groups. That funding can be used to do things like cost share programs, education outreach, and different types of research projects. And since 2016, they've funded over 50 different groups. So that's the map you're seeing on the right side of the screen. The polygons representing where those groups have formed and operated on top of these grants. And if you're familiar with agriculture in Wisconsin, they've actually had groups formed throughout the majority of the agricultural regions of the state. And you can kind of see that from the map. And like I said, I know there are ongoing comparable efforts here. So by no means am I saying that they created this and everyone else is following along. But one of the groups I wanted to highlight that's come about as a result of this, and this is a group that we're fortunate enough to collaborate with through some of our work, is a nonprofit called Farmers for Sustainable. So as this DATCAP program rolled out and these farmer-led groups came together, they needed some assistance in being able to administer their programs, engage with farms. And that's really where this 501c3 was formed, Farmers for Sustainable Food. They came online and you can see on the map on the left side of the screen, some of the different farmer-led groups that they support were in a support and administrative role for making sure these groups could operate, schedule their field days, get these grants processed and get the money out to the farms. But one of the unique parts of it is farm leadership was always at the core of what they're doing. So that the farmers at the end of the day were deciding what the programs looked like, how they operated, and what was important to how those programs hit the ground. And through this process, as they began managing more of these farmer-led groups, one that did expand into the state of Minnesota recently. But they started to ask the questions of how can we do more than just the DATCAP program? We want to tackle projects that go beyond what DATCAP is supporting with us today. And so this is where Houston Engineering started to get involved a little bit as a collaborator. We worked with Farmers for Sustainable Food and the Nature Conservancy to develop a framework for how you can launch a sustainability project through these farm-led groups. Now I screwed up my images a little bit on the slide. So the next slide is the image I wanted to have on this slide. And this image is the image I wanted to have on the next slide, but it should work out just fine. Really, that framework stood up a process to work through with a farmer-led group on what you might think about for launching a sustainability project. And you're seeing those steps on the right side of the screen, because we got 15 minutes, I'm not going to go through each one by one. But generally speaking, I call out some of the key bullets that the groups are encouraged to think about as they're pulling together a project to work with. And that's thinking about finance and economics on the farm as they think about sustainability. And then if you're gonna define sustainability within that group, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people across the nation. So having a discussion about what that means within their community and how they're gonna measure it. So are you talking about greenhouse gases? Are you talking about bugs and bees? Are you talking about water? What are you talking about? And the other thing that they found time and time again with these groups in Wisconsin, at least, that was very important is also local resources. If you're familiar working in the sustainability space, which I know a lot of the people in this room are, sometimes those goals like greenhouse gas emissions can be pretty broad and global in their impact. A lot of the driver for the farms that would get engaged in these projects, though, they're concerned about what was happening locally in their community and how they can have a positive impact on that. So local resources was another emphasis area in standing up projects. And as they went through that process, they had a lot of success in launching some projects. These are just a few examples, and I am going to highlight one of these in a case study in just a moment. But the Farmers for Sustainable Food through a parent organization, Edge Dairy Farmer Cooperative, was able to get a USDA Climate Smart project. Not surprisingly, that's suspended right now as of February. But they had a lot of success in that. I'm going to highlight that in just a moment. They've also been able to, through this model and launching these projects, get into milkshed-wide greenhouse gas assessments. So they're in the process of assessing an entire, well, it's a fairly large dairy processor, their entire milkshed within the US through this farmer-led framework. And then finally, local water quality improvements. That's something I think was a core of how many of these groups came together. And one of the more innovative ones I'm seeing right now that's coming online this fall through the winter is they have a farmer-led group that's actually trying to get a waterway delisted within their community. So it's an impaired water. They're kind of taking ownership of the process, working alongside the Department of Natural Resources in Wisconsin, which is in charge of Clean Water Act implementation, and saying, we're going to come to the table, we're going to do the detailed assessments on our farms to see what the impacts directly to this impaired waterway are today, and figure out what those improvements are that we can do on our farms to hopefully get it delisted in the not so distant future. So again, just a bit of an overview of the types of projects that have been launched through this framework. Now I'm going to transition into a little more pointed case studies. We're going to focus on one of the projects in Wisconsin. Then I'm going to transition into a farmer-led initiative that's been launched in Iowa, give you a sense of some of the similarities there. And then I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Sara, and she's going to talk about some things going on in Nebraska. So I mentioned the Climate Smart project. These are just some snapshots of the purpose and goals of why that project got launched and Farmers for Sustainable Food's role in that. Big picture, what they were trying to do is for as many farms as they could, and their goal was 300 dairy farms primarily, give them comprehensive baselines on how they're impacting the environment from a greenhouse gas perspective as well as a water quality perspective. On this slide, I'm just highlighting the greenhouse gas information. They were doing water quality at the same time. And this is just for the 2023 crop year. So set a little context for what that means. They're trying to get to 300 farms. They had 53 farms enroll in year one, which was the assessments were for the 2023 crop year. Coming into 2024 assessments, their project got suspended. So it's paused right now, but as of January, they had exceeded their enrollment. They're at over 120 farms enrolled in the program, and they had people on the wait list to get into it for the next assessment year. So they're seeing a lot of success and interest in the farms and getting involved in this program. Other thing, and well, I'll wait for a slide or two to touch on that, but the year one results, and this is not from any new action, this is just establishing those baselines for what was already occurring on the farms. They had 53 farms enrolled, over 100,000 acres of cropland, and over 70,000 head of cattle involved in the project in year one. And all you're seeing is a snippet of the greenhouse gas reduction stats associated with the conservation that was already on this. So just briefly, I got two slides on this. AGI's role in all this. You might be thinking at this point, why is this guy up here talking about all these other people's work? He's got no role in it, but our responsibility in this project, we developed the protocols. That's a fancy word in greenhouse gas world for methods and procedures for how they did all the calculations. And so they would go out, they had the responsibility of being boots on the ground with the farms, collecting the data. We were the background data nerds, which we kind of like that role. We're cranking all the information, put it into reports so they could go and gauge the farms on themselves. briefly, I'm not gonna go into each one of these are the student models we used to do a lot of calculations. Since this is an education outreach session, I think I can skip over that one. You're gonna have a hard time reading this, I think. Just because of the size of the text and the size of the room. Quick disclaimer, none of the data on this is accurate or real. So, one of the things, this is a sample of what an individualized farm report would look like coming out of this process. So the amount of information that farm will get on how they're impacting greenhouse gas emissions. There's also a panel on water quality. Couldn't fit all that on one slide. The reason it is not real is I cannot share a farmer's private data in a public meeting, so the data is very close to real. I just anonymized it all and I moved some of the numbers around by a few decimal places here and there so that you could not attribute it to the individual farm report. My point in putting this up though is to show you the types of information they're looking at, the granularity of information you got on their farm. And for me, I'm gonna highlight one thing on the slide and then talk about some statistics not on the slide. And I don't think I can, does this have a laser? Yeah, so I was looking in this corner down here. This is probably the piece of information, at least in dairy, that they've been the most interested in. And that's the carbon intensity of milk production. So think of it as the units of greenhouse gas emissions per unit of milk produced. And what we saw with the farms that came into this program, and this was pretty uniform for all of them, industry average roughly is about 1 unit of greenhouse gas emitted per unit of milk produced. So that's about where most of the industry is within the US. This farm, and I didn't move these numbers too much, was at about a 0.35. So well above industry standards. It's pretty remarkable if you think about it. And most of the farms, those 53 that we got in and we were able to assess, were at or below that industry standard right out of the gates. And this is transitioning more into the outreach piece. Those that were above it would typically pull us aside after they had their one-on-one meeting with us and say, you gotta explain to me why I'm not as good as the standard, because I want to beat it. So we saw a lot of engagement and a lot of interest in this data and how it would impact the farm's operation. And Farmers for Sustainable Food, this wasn't part of the USDA project, they actually did a survey of the 53 farms after 1 year. And 2 stats that I found really interesting, they had an 80% plus response rate. Which if you do surveys, I don't know, we usually get excited if it's like 10 to 20% response rate. They got 80% of those farms to respond to the survey. And they had an over 70% positive response on how useful this information was to their operation and making future decisions. So for us, I mean, it's suspended right now. We're finding pathways to keep this work going alongside our collaborator, but really encouraged about how this is going forward.
Come in another meeting, but it's 3 for
For 50 years, like I said, I'd get back to the Great Plains, or at least closer here in just a minute. Similar effort being launched in Iowa right now, shift in focus a little bit though. In Iowa, there's several lakes that are impaired for phosphorus issues. Not uncommon to many areas in the upper Great Plains. If you have phosphorus-based standards for impairments.
session 2.
In this instance, the Nature Conservancy, Mosaic, NIFWIF, Wright Foundation, Houston Engineering, and Iowa Soybean have come together to collaborate with a group of farmers in 2 different watersheds, where we're trying to drive on-farm assessments to the actual impact in the lake itself. So Nature Conservancy is leading an effort to engage with the farms. They've got a huge group of farms together already. They formed their own 501c3 with a nice logo, at least my opinion, it's a nice logo, the Northwest Iowa Ag Stewardship Alliance. And they are in the process right now of enrolling those farms in these water quality assessments, whereas an outcome, each farm that enrolls is gonna understand what their water quality results look like and how that's impacting that downstream lake. Our hope in this instance, similar to that group I mentioned that's trying to get an impaired water delisted, is that it drives farmers to not only recognize what's going on their farm, but be part of that motivated community and hopefully restoring the lakes eventually. So progress to date is encouraging, should have results forthcoming in the next couple of years. And with that, I think we're shifting gears to Nebraska. Sara's good.
Again, just as like disclaimer, this is not my work, but just trying to parallel it to what has been happening in the state of Nebraska. Again, I'm trying to just take a broad look at what has been done along the lines of these types of outreach and engagement. And I think one of the biggest things we've seen recently, a lot of the debates associated with some of these programs, a lot of them are newer. I think our state is starting to see the, water quality necessity, and governors coming around to realize that this needs to be a priority. So with these efforts, the NSAC is a very new one, and I think that might be the most relatable program that the state has right now. And if it can get some priority and through the legislature and some funding similar to potentially like Wisconsin has done, would that be a good way to facilitate some of these farmer-led organizations coming together, forming their own watershed groups and performing some of the actions that they are up in Wisconsin? So I found that we were kind of headed in the right direction, but not necessarily where all the other states are. The One Red Plan, now I'm not with NDE and I don't know the funding status of this program, but they definitely had that tied to greenhouse gases and carbon reduction emissions. So again, it'll be interesting to see if that actually moves forward. If it does, there could be a lot of progress made in the state, if that funding is continued, but I've not heard any updates on that in the recent days. Additionally, there has been some efforts with the Nature Conservancy that is similar to what Drew has done, so I did want to highlight, again, I'm not involved in that one, but I know there have been some NRDs that have been active in doing that type of work. So I think that's some definite progress in continuing to move forward with those types of programs within the state of Nebraska it would be a positive step for us. Lastly, it's the task force. I think everybody's interested in seeing what happens with this task force, what direction it takes. Will there be additional funding mechanisms through the state, making water quality a priority and helping out the efforts in that sense? So, nothing specific that I worked on, just kind of trying to tie some of this work back to Nebraska and where we can maybe make improvements and learn from other states and what they're doing. One more.
And you can stay up too, because it'll take 2 seconds. So Conservation Connect, I just want to make a quick plug for this. You can scan the QR code and get to it if you're interested. I was talking with a client, local government client, who has farmers come in asking about conservation costs. I asked them a simple question. It's like, when a farmer comes in with a problem, how long does it take you to find out what assistance programs are available locally right in your community? He told me 2 to 3 days. I said, that's crazy. It can't take that long. So this was years ago. We hashed an idea and we ended up getting a lot of great collaborators. Owner operator of this is Conservation Technology Information Center. They're a nonprofit that operates across the nation. And the concept, I don't think I can say this. Is this recorded?
Yeah.
So think about, online marketplaces where people can post ads freely and then consumers can go and look at those and find out what's available locally. Conceptually, that's what we're trying to do here, but 100% focused on conservation cost sharing technical assistance. So offers of programs can go on, post their ads, and then people who need that assistance can quickly find what's available and actionable in that moment. So you can scan the QR code if you're interested in that. And then there is a map showing kind of a distribution of the amount of ads that are up there today. And I got this from the client a week ago, so it could be a little updated. Anyway.
And I think NSAC has a similar, it's called a Find program on their website, so I think they've also gone down that path. Which is great that Nebraska's taking that step already as well.
But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, really cool projects, and I love the emphasis on phosphorus, which is obviously hugely important in Wisconsin and Iowa and here in Nebraska, although we're still learning to appreciate P as well as N. But what I wanted to ask is, with these water quality sort of driven outcomes, we know that it can take years to decades to see any recovery in the lakes, rivers, or streams. How do you manage that with the farming groups that you're working with?
That's an ongoing thing, and I think if you're honest and upfront right away with that, they are understanding, at least for the groups that we work with. And eventually you get to a point where they're trying to work with what they control, right? And I'll take the group, and this is in the Door County area, that's trying to get the waterway impaired. They're gonna eventually be doing the assessments on their farm and hopefully hit the pollution diet needed for phosphorus within their footprint. But the DNR is still gonna have to go monitor the waterway to see if it meets quality standards, right? So there is gonna be that connection and understanding between the parties. And And I 100% agree, there could be a decadal lag effect before you actually start to see that within the stream system. So it's challenging.
So, what is driving farmers' interest in the greenhouse project in Wisconsin? And the second question I have is, when farmers, they bring down their carbon intensity, do they have like an incentive to do that? Or like how does it work?
Great questions. So their interest generally in getting involved in those groups, in my experience, is more community. Things going on in the community with water resources, perception about agriculture, more than greenhouse gases. In those examples, though, the drive for greenhouse gases is coming from supply chain connected to dairy, in my opinion. Because we do have a lot of big corporations that have set climate goals connected to greenhouse gases, and those are starting to move their way down to farms now. So that pressure is starting to come from, you know, like the big brands you'd see in grocery stores, down to the groups that process those ingredients and get them to the brand, and now all the way down to the farm level. In terms of incentive, the exact business justification for why a farm would do that into the long run is to be determined. In this project, we're actually not immediately cost sharing projects on the ground. We're giving farmers a stipend for their time to participate. So that's the initial incentive, along with that relationship between the farm and their dairy processor. Because it's usually the dairy processor that's the immediate connection that is asking for that information. So there's a natural interest, right? If their dairy processor has to drive down emissions on the milk coming out of the processing plant to the brand, there's kind of a shared responsibility there of working with the farm and working that out too. Now, the business incentive in the long run, still to be determined. Very good question.
Thank you.
I really liked seeing the sheet that you shared, even though it was, modified for, say, anonymized or whatever, but that kind of got me thinking about the industry average that was reported, and the one example of the farmer who potentially was higher than the industry average. And it made, I don't know if the program will continue, but it made me think about, it would be really interesting to add different comparisons. Maybe I'm just thinking about the farmer who had a higher than average, and that might deter them from maybe continuing changes because they maybe feel kind of like that's too hard. It's too hard to get back to that average, or it's too far from that average. I feel like Crystal has knowledge of this from like behavior.
Stuff.
What?
It's like nudging.
Nudging, yeah. So like little nudges in terms of what numbers are shared, maybe comparison to like other people in the state. Was the industry average just like a US average, or?
So it was research based, and it's actually been updated in the last year. It's right at one now by some research out of the University of Minnesota. But what you're saying is exactly what we aspire to.
Yeah.
But because the program was so new, we didn't
Yeah.
have enough cohorts within geographies
Sure.
to anonymize the peer-to-peer learning.
Yeah, yeah,
Our target is 10 farms within a group.
Yeah.
We were gonna get there within the next year or
Yeah.
two, so they would get a report that shows their result, the result compared to their peers,
Yeah.
and then the result compared to regional and national.
Yes.
averages.
yeah, cool. That's just what I was thinking. I was like, that could make actually, I mean, it's a nudge, it's a small modification in the data that you're sharing with them, but could nudge, some continued engagement with it.
And just to be clear, I think that I want to give our client credit one more time. I think the value response from the farms wasn't this big data sheet, but they did a one-on-one meeting with them explaining the
Yeah.
data and how it was driven. So,
Right,
I love to think we're awesome as the
Sure.
backroom data.
yeah,
nerds.
yeah,
But I think it was actually that one-on-one kind of interaction on what the data.
yeah, yeah. Cool.
Question about demographics of the farmers in the groups. Younger farmers, I'm assuming predominantly male, education background. Do you have that information?
Dominantly white male, but we did have a spread. And age spread, I don't have it handy. We would have it, our client would have it. We didn't access that information on our end as the consultant, but there was a bit of a spread in age. We had some earlier career farmers, some mid and some senior. I would say most farms we engage with were large
Oh,
operations. There were some smaller ones, but I mean, we're talking 2,000 plus head of cattle on a farm. So they're pretty sophisticated in their operation. And it would vary who engaged in that farm, because it's usually a family farm with multiple generations operating. So we might get someone early in the career that's interested in engaging, or it might be more the matriarch of the farm that was the one at the table. So bit of a spread, but I think if they pulled it up, it'd be fair to say generally white male, probably 35 plus.